So, does everybody, this seems like a group of people who don't probably need to do the original introduction I usually do, because most of you probably know what the Sierra Club is. Is there anybody who doesn't know what the Sierra Club is? All right, good. Well, we've been around for a long time. As the logo says, we've been around since 1892. Environmental Protection Group, all that kind of stuff. And I work for a particular part of the Sierra Club. I work for National Sierra Club, based here, and part of what's called the Beyond Coal campaign. And so what I want to talk with you about today is what is the Beyond Coal campaign, how it's working in Arkansas, what kind of things we're trying to do, maybe some of the, how it got started, what kind of successes we had, and what we're trying to do overall in the next few years and then in the next couple of decades when it comes to America's energy supply. So I get this a lot when we're talking about, I say I am from the Beyond Coal campaign. People say, well, why are you focusing on coal? A lot of people don't even know, and in truth, I did not know.
We probably ought to get those lights in the front on. Maybe, I don't know where.
Does that work?
Right now, that's too dark.
How's that?
Don't work.
Okay. I did not know when I first started working for the Sierra Club what a big role coal plays in our lives in the country. And I certainly didn't know what it had to do with Arkansas and our electricity sources. So up until maybe 10 years ago, coal was responsible for about 50%, a little bit more than 50% of the electricity in the United States. And so what we're doing in Sierra Club is one of our biggest things in the environmental movement and Sierra Club in general is working on solving the problem of global warming, right? And some people call it climate change, some people call it climate disruption, but we all know what we're talking about. There's too much carbon going into the atmosphere, it's warming the planet. We're trying to figure out ways to reduce that by a certain time period. And we're relying on science more than anything else. The science tells us that we need to make drastic reductions by the year 2050, or we're going to reach a tipping point, and we're going to have some significant environmental consequences as a result. So the science also tells us that if we're really serious about lowering the amount of carbon in the atmosphere in a significant way, there's no way we can do that unless we get the world off of coal in terms of energy production. So what the answer to why coal is because we can't solve the global warming problem without addressing the issue of coal. This site right here, not specifically where it is, but does anybody know what this is? What you're looking at here?
Yeah, it's strip mining.
It's not strip mining, but it is mining. It's what they call mountaintop removal coal mining. And what mountaintop removal coal mining is, this is in Appalachia. This particular one is in West Virginia. And what we're doing here is traditional coal mining has been exactly what you think about, going into tunnels with the hats on, mining coal and bringing it out. Those coal sources have become somewhat depleted, and so what the coal companies are doing in Appalachia is they're literally going to the tops of mountains, dynamiting off the tops of the mountains, removing the tops, and then getting the thin seams of coal underneath. And all that rubble, what they call overfill, goes down into the valleys below, chokes off streams, destroys habitats, and all that kind of stuff. So in Appalachia right now, there have been more than 500 mountains that are completely level. They're not coming back. And more than 1,200 miles of streams and waterways are now completely choked off. So I've been out there a few times. This is a picture I took in West Virginia. And you can see it kind of looks like the surface of the moon. It's pretty brutal. So when we're talking about why coal, that's one reason for sure. But let me give you some stats from the Energy Information Administration. That's a part of the federal government that really gives you up-to-date data all the time on where our energy sources are, what kind of pollution is coming as a result of them. Lots and lots of information. If you're ever interested in doing that, and you go to the Department of Energy website, there's a section, the EIA, the Energy Information Administration. And what this graph shows you is that when you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions that come from the electric sector, the vast majority of those come from coal. This graph shows 81% coming from coal. It's a little bit of a dated slide, but it's the vast majority of that. So what we're doing in the Beyond Coal campaign is saying if we're trying to get serious about carbon removal and carbon reduction, we got to go after coal. That's where the big gains are. Also, when you're talking about coal, though, you're talking about a lot of other really nasty things that come as a result of burning coal. It's not just carbon dioxide, which has some benefits, right? We're also talking about arsenic. We're talking about sulfur dioxide. We're talking about nickel. We're talking about chromium. And maybe the thing that the folks talk about the most when we're talking about hazardous air pollutants, we're talking about mercury. Poisonous mercury is a big byproduct of burning coal. So if we can stop burning coal as a big source of our nation's energy, we can improve in big ways not only our environmental health but also our public health, because all these things lead to significant public health problems. This is just a graph we put together showing what some of these things cause. We're talking about sulfur dioxide, which is a byproduct of burning coal. We're talking about acid rain. If we're talking about smog and ozone problems, which deal with visibility and also lung problems, nitrogen oxide and what they call VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. Soot, we talk about it in terms of what's called PM 2.5 and PM 10, which are really tiny little particles that get in your lungs and cause all sorts of problems. So there's really about 30 hazardous air pollutants, is the term of art, when you're talking about EPA regs, that are regulated and that are byproducts of coal. Okay. So it's not just the Sierra Club talking to you about this kind of stuff, right? These are significant public health issues, there's significant environmental health issues, there's significant economic issues as well. A few quotes that I'll let you read as you wish, but there's significant amounts of health costs, estimated to be $100 billion annually, caused directly from pollution from coal-fired power plants. Premature deaths, mercury poisoning is a big issue for women of childbearing age and children. And more than 50% of Americans live within 30 miles of a coal plant. And as I said a moment ago, I didn't know much about coal or electricity production when I first started working for Sierra Club about 10 years ago. But I certainly didn't know where my local coal plant was. Does anybody know where the closest coal plant is? Yes, sir. White Bluff, that's right, down in Redfield. Good, I didn't know that, so you're ahead of me. So White Bluff is one. Arkansas is a pretty small state, but when the Turk plant opens in next fall, we're going to have 5 coal-fired power plants in the state of Arkansas. That's a big number for a state our size, and it causes a significant amount of public health and environmental problems. On a different note, it also causes some significant political problems. I'm not here to give you a partisan speech. I'm not talking about in terms of Democrats or Republicans here. What I am talking about is in terms of people who care about the environment and people who don't care about the environment as much. These are the Koch brothers, as you might have seen a lot in the last political campaign. They may support candidates that you support or don't support. What's unarguable, though, is that the money that the Koch brothers and Peabody Energy and ExxonMobil provides goes to fund a lot of people who really fight reasonable environmental regulation. I've read from the Tea Party to the American Petroleum Institute to these guys who ran a ton of ads, and you may have seen the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity. There's a lot of power in the coal industry. It's waning, but there's a lot of power on Capitol Hill with the coal industry, and a lot of folks who are not our allies are funding that. Just for informational purposes, if you're interested to know where the coal is in the United States, it's largely in these bluish areas here. You're primarily talking about Appalachia, this area here, and you're also primarily talking about, as far as the mined coal, up here in Wyoming, which is called the Powder River Basin area. Most of the coal in the country that's burned for electricity comes from those two areas. All the coal that comes into Arkansas is from Wyoming. And so when you hear anybody talking about why we need to keep coal burning plants burning for Arkansas as far as Arkansas jobs, talk to them about the billions of dollars that go out of the state every year to buy Wyoming coal and ship it into here. It's an amazing amount of money. Now, we'll just skip ahead for just a minute and tell you what the coal campaign has been trying to do. I'm going to flash back for just a second to the beginning of the first George W. Bush administration. Around 2001, you guys may remember there was some controversy regarding Vice President Cheney and what was called the Energy Task Force. What basically was that the Vice President was meeting with secret people, trying to figure out what the nation's energy plan was going to be for the next few decades. What were we going to do? And they would not release the names of who they were meeting with. It became a controversial area. Sierra Club and some other groups filed Freedom of Information Act requests, filed some lawsuits when we couldn't get the access to that. And when we did get access to it, it was really no surprise who the administration was meeting with. They were meeting with coal companies, they were meeting with oil companies, they weren't meeting with environmentalists. Now, what were they planning to do? Well, once the plan was put forward, what they tried to do was they said we're going to build 150 new coal-fired power plants all around the country. That was the big meat of the plan. The current, at that time, the current coal fleet was aging quite a bit. Usually they're around for 30, 40 years, ideally. That is the life of a coal plant. So they were aging out, and so what the administration wanted to do was build this whole amazing fleet of new coal plants that were going to really pollute the environment in a big, big way. So what does Sierra Club do? Sierra Club did what we do pretty regularly, and kind of audacious group sometimes. We decided to try to stop all of them at the same time. And we got a lot of folks talking to us about, hey, you know, that's a lot of coal plants. There's no way you're going to beat all those coal plants. Try to get the worst ones, or the dirtiest ones, or the biggest ones. And we're in a position where we couldn't really do that, because we're a membership organization. We have members in all 50 states, and it wouldn't work well with our organization to say we're going to try to fight the ones in Michigan, but we're going to sell out our members in Texas or Arkansas. We're going to fight the ones in Georgia, but not the ones in Wisconsin. So we really had to build a campaign back in 2001, 2002 to take on these coal-fired power plants. And that is what the Beyond Coal campaign is. And so we're here 10 years later, a little bit more than 10 years later, and I'll tell you that over the last decade or so, the numbers change almost on a weekly basis, but of the coal plants that have been proposed since 2001, Sierra Club has been involved in stopping over 170 of them from being built in the United States. And what does that mean in a real sense? It means two things, really. It means more than 500 million tons of carbon dioxide that is not in the atmosphere every year for the next 40 or 50 years, which goes towards our goal of really helping solve this climate problem. What it also means, though, is that those power plants are not locked in for the next 40 to 50 years, crowding out solar and crowding out wind and crowding out cleaner sources of energy. So the market is a little bit more open than it would be. If you live in a regulated power state like Arkansas, where if I build a power plant, I have to get permission from the Public Service Commission, and I serve a particular customer need, and those are my customers, and they had to buy power from me. If I'm a solar developer or a wind developer, I'm not going to come to Arkansas because there's no customers to sell to. By stopping a lot of these coal-fired power plants around the country, we have really helped create a vacuum and create a situation where solar and wind and even a little bit of geothermal has taken hold and has really moved ahead. And so this slide here is a little bit dated, I'm happy to tell you. It says 167 plants defeated. We're now over to 170, which is exciting. Now, how did it happen? I always try to be real careful about saying the Sierra Club did it by themselves, because that's not true. And anybody who says that should be corrected. The way the Sierra Club works is we work in every state, and we work with allied organizations, other environmental groups, church leaders in some cases, business groups, environmental justice groups, ratepayer groups, anybody who's interested in a better energy future we'll work with. And so state by state, plant by plant, we've worked to stop these things from getting their permits to build, from getting approval by the state. Sometimes the governor will come in the state and say this is not a good idea. Sometimes we'll talk them into stopping the coal plant and building something cleaner, right? But it's always about people getting involved, and it's not just Sierra Club. So let me give you just a little bit of idea of how we might come in and work on a campaign, because there's several parts of the Sierra Club which I think all really work together. But it's a big part of the strategy, you know, like if we're going after a big, gigantic adversary like the coal industry, we try to do the old death by 1,000 cuts strategy. Because the coal industry is big, the coal industry is powerful, and the coal industry has a lot more money than we do. But we have a lot of people, and we have a lot of really smart, creative people who are working on these issues. So we'll have a volunteer portion of it. They'll run the campaigns in a particular state. We have lawyers who are working to stop every permit. We have great communications people. We have great online organizers. We have volunteers everywhere. And they're trying to hit these coal plants at every level, every step of the way, to try to stop them from doing basically what they've been doing to this country, which is polluting us in a big, big way. I wanted to flash forward to this one real quick, because I think it's important to note when we're talking about this idea of why coal. There are several distinct phases in the life cycle of coal that we need to point out, and every one of them has some significant damage and some significant risk to all of us. From the time the coal is mined, I showed you that the mountaintop removal areas, it's devastating to certain communities. When it's burned, as I mentioned, all sorts of hazardous air pollutants get into the air that can really affect your public health and really affect your environment. What do you do also after the coal is burned? It results in coal ash, and you got to store it somewhere. This is an example in Tennessee a few Christmases ago, what happens in a lot of places. Sometimes it's stored in pits as dry ash. Sometimes it's mixed with other liquids and stored as coal sludge in big outdoor earthen dams holding 1 billion gallons worth of coal sludge in communities. And what happened a few Christmases ago in Tennessee was one of these dams burst in December, about December 22nd, right before Christmas or so. And this town in Tennessee was covered in 1 billion gallons of coal sludge. Okay? And all that coal sludge, all that coal ash has exactly the same kind of stuff we've been talking about in terms of hazardous pollutants. So it's an incredible mess. This has not happened just in Tennessee. It also happened in Lake Michigan earlier last year. All across the country, they have these sites where they've been storing sludge and storing ash for years and just waiting for this kind of thing to happen. So why am I telling you all that? I'm telling you all that because if we're talking about changing this country's energy policy, which I think we are, there are many reasons to do it. Now, what the coal industry will tell you over and over is that you can't get rid of coal because it's so cheap. It's the cheapest source of power we have, and everybody's power bills are going to go up. I'll tell you, there's a real truth here, and I really want to underscore this. The reason that coal power has been historically lower is because the coal industry has not had to pay the true cost of doing business. They have not had to internalize the costs of what they do to the rest of us. For instance, if I go into my backyard and throw a bunch of trash into the Arkansas River, I may be guilty of violating the Clean Water Act. You know, I'm not supposed to be able to do that kind of stuff. Coal companies can blow the tops off of mountains and choke off streams. They have loopholes. They have exemptions from federal law. They don't have to follow that like I do. If I want to go and burn a bunch of tires in my backyard, I might be guilty of violating the Clean Air Act. Coal companies aren't held to the same standards as the rest of us, right? If I want to store toxic waste on my property and just bury it in a pit, I can't do that. That's toxic waste. There's certain types of regulations that are in place to deal with that. Coal ash right now is not considered to be toxic waste, so it's subject to different rules, and so it can be stored in these open pits, or it can be stored in these earthen dams as sludge. There are no federal regulations in place for dealing with coal ash. Okay, so all of those things that I'm mentioning, they keep the costs down for the coal industry. Right? They don't have to deal with toxic waste. They don't have to deal with all these cumbersome clean air regulations. They don't have to deal with all these cumbersome clean water regulations. And what's our strategy? Our strategy is to make sure that they do. Make sure that they start internalizing those costs they've been externalizing on the rest of us. Because who's paying those costs? They're gonna be paid. They're not paid on your electricity bill, but they're paid when you go to the emergency room. They're paid when you have heart problems. They're paid when you have asthma. They're paid, 13,000 premature deaths a year. So we have to have a strategy for changing the way things are in the United States. And this is what we've been trying to do here. Really putting the squeeze on the coal industry over the last several years, and it's starting to work. Okay? I mentioned that we have had a hand in shutting down or stopping 170 new coal plants from being built. We're also now, we've got a few that we're still battling, but for the most part, the coal industry is not building new coal plants, with some exceptions. Now we got to go after the existing fleet of coal plants, the old ones, the ones that are chugging away and polluting us right now. And so there's a two-part strategy that we're working on. We've got the state-based coal fights here on the bottom. They're kind of giving that bottom-up grassroots pressure to the coal industry. All those things I was talking about, state by state, plant by plant, really putting the squeeze on the coal industry and saying, we don't want you operating in our state anymore. We don't want this plant operating anymore. Let's shut this plant down and do clean energy or energy efficiency. That's squeezing them from the top, or from the bottom. From the top, though, the real effective tool that we've had over the last 4 years is a series of strong Environmental Protection Agency rules that have been proposed. Some have been passed, some are pending. And this is where I think at least from my point of view, from what I do for a living, one of the most important results of the last election. was we have a lot of rules in the pipeline that are really going to put the squeeze on the coal industry and improve public health. But if the election had gone the other way, those rules would be tossed out the window, right? So all these rules now are putting the squeeze from the top on the coal industry, making it, for instance, we've passed a mercury rule, or a mercury rule is pending, cutting mercury emissions by more than 90% from the coal industry. So they have to install additional equipment to get that mercury out of the air. Rules are pending for ozone, for smog. Rules are pending for how much water they use and how they use it. Rules are pending for sulfur dioxide. All these things, again and again and again, the coal industry is howling about. They're saying, oh, there's a war on coal. It's not a war on coal. There's a war on protecting the environment, a war for protecting public health, because all those things affect us in a bad way. And they let the coal industry compete in a way that's not on par with the other parts of the energy industry. If we really believe, or if the coal industry really believes, hey, we got the cheapest power available. Well, if they had to add stuff for mercury, if they have to add stuff for sulfur dioxide, they add stuff for nitrogen oxide to control all these kind of things, suddenly, when you're looking at the price of coal-based electricity, and you're comparing it with natural gas, comparing it with solar, comparing it with wind, it's starting to be on par. And then you're at a level playing field, right? Because everybody should, I think as a rule, sounds a little simplistic, but if you're doing a business and you're inflicting harm on the rest of us, you should have to pay for that, right? I don't want to have to pay for all the harm that you're doing to me. So these EPA rules and the state-based coal fights are really having a significant impact on the nation's energy future. Now, we really had a four-part strategy here for how we were doing this kind of stuff. We wanted to end the coal rush. That was all the new coal plants that we talked about. And largely that has stopped. Largely the new EPA rules in place, by and large everybody agrees, even the ones that are already in place, are pretty much guaranteeing that there's never going to be another coal plant built in the United States. Because they can't do it in a clean way. It's the dirtiest fuel we have. There's a couple that are kind of grandfathered in that were in construction before these rules are passed. So, but for the most part, not going to happen. Second goal, by 2015, we want to get retired at least a third of the existing coal plants in this country. 105,000 megawatts is our goal. And we're on our way right now. We're close to 50,000 megawatts just in the last 2 years. Okay. The third part there, blocking new coal export infrastructures. Coal industry is seeing the handwriting on the wall in the United States, right? All these coal plants are shutting down. No new coal plants are getting built. Where are they going to sell their coal? They want to ship it elsewhere. They want to ship it to China. They want to ship it to India. And the only way they're going to do that in any sort of scale is if we expand ports, mainly in the Northwest and in Texas right now. And so that's the big battlefront that we have right now, is trying to stop those ports from being expanded. And why do we care about that? Because it's a global problem. If it's burned in China, it's burned in India, it gets in the same atmosphere that we're all breathing here in the United States. And finally, the last part of the strategy, we don't want to just stop things. We don't want to just say no. We want to replace that energy with clean energy, with solar, with wind, with geothermal. And really by the end of 2030, well, this is by the end of 2020 where we are, where we will be, excuse me. But the last part, number 4 is what I wanted to point out. Our goal, our 20-year plan that we started back in 2010, is to have the entire coal fleet in the United States offline by 2030. Okay. Now, how do we do that? It's a big challenge. It's pretty audacious. But I think the way we have to do this is doing what we're doing here, but also it's not going to make, we're not going to make it unless we have a significant push from state and federal governments towards expanding renewable energy. And you're starting to see this happen. The coal industry, the oil industry, the polluters for years and years and years have had incredible subsidies from the federal government. It's one of the reasons why the power has been cheaper, right? The subsidies you have for renewable energy are pretty tiny. I think we're going to have a significant increase in that if we're going to have the kind of research and development advances to show the rest of the world that we can do this. But I think we can get there. I think we're going to have to get there. And you're already starting to see progress. Sometimes when I talk to groups and we're talking about environmentalism in the states, I hear people saying, you know, we're not California here in Arkansas. We're not Vermont. That stuff doesn't play here. Fair enough, we're not Vermont. We're not California. But you know the states in this country that are leading the nation in wind energy? South Dakota, Iowa, Texas. They're not considered to be on anybody's blue state list all the time. You know, some of them are swing, but definitely Texas and South Dakota are not. Why are they expanding in wind energy? Why are they expanding in solar? Because it makes good economic sense. Even Republican governors, even conservative legislators, they see that this makes good economic sense. It creates a lot of jobs for their states. And as environmentalists, I wish everybody did everything for the right reasons, right? But I don't care, really, as long as it gets done. If people are expanding the renewable energy industry and for economic reasons, great, fantastic. Even in Arkansas right now, we have 3 companies that all added up is about 2,000 jobs. They're all about the wind energy industry, making turbines, making blades. They're all foreign companies that are located here in Arkansas, and there's a 4th one on the way. Okay, so it means real jobs. Nobody's ever said that Mike Beebe is an ardent environmentalist. I don't think he would claim that. But he is an economics guy, and he is a guy who wants to create jobs, and he has really been a guy who's pushed forward on this in Arkansas, bringing clean energy jobs to the state. This is kind of a graphic that illustrates a point that I was showing you a while ago about why we're going to win and the age of the coal plants in this country. It's hard to see right here, but this is a timeline here starting in the 1920s, 1930s, so forth. Believe it or not, there are still some coal plants in this country that are operating that were built in the 1920s. Okay? Before the Clean Air Act, before modern pollution controls. And when the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970, if you were a coal plant that was already in business, you were grandfathered in. You didn't have to be part of the new standards until you upgraded your plant. So these plants, some of them are still chugging along. You get to right about here, this is 2000, 2011, right about the time when I mentioned that Vice President Cheney's Energy Task Force wanted to have 150 new coal plants. Well, these plants were pretty old. All these plants behind us were significantly older, and they were aging out. So this group that was proposed was supposed to take the place of that group. Now that they've been stopped, there's an opportunity for us. And that's why you're seeing such a big advance in coal, in solar and in wind energy in this country. What are we doing to support EPA rules? EPA is one of those agencies that a lot of people like to beat up on, historically, business folks especially. And so when EPA proposes rules, they're not used to getting a lot of support. They're used to getting a lot of abuse. What we've been doing over the last several years is when the EPA has been proposing strong rules to clean up the air, or strong rules to clean up the water, strong rules that will help shut down the polluting fuel industry, we're supportive. And so we, all around the country, have been turning out people to support EPA rules. This is the very first one back, maybe in 2009, soon after the Obama administration came into office. The EPA held a hearing about carbon dioxide. Is it a danger to the country or not? And they had an EPA hearing in Seattle. We brought in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to testify that they wanted strong EPA rules to protect their country. And this was an event we had at lunchtime, about 2,000 people in the middle of a day saying, we want this. Stuff works. EPA cares. EPA is suddenly feeling supported, and they passed the endangerment finding and said CO2 is something we have to regulate. We've been doing this for mercury, we've been doing this for ozone, we're doing this for smog, we've been doing it for soot regulations, water regulations, and it's starting to make a difference because EPA rules are critical to our success. Here's some of them that are pending and some of them that are being pushed to the next, to this administration. I won't go through each one of them, but you'll see that they cover the gamut of things from air pollution to mercury to what at the bottom is coal combustion waste, which is the official way to talk about ash from coal-fired power plants. All these things are going to be regulated in a certain way that they haven't been regulated before, which is going to force the coal companies to do what they should do. They're going to force it to internalize the cost of doing business. I'll show you a couple more things that we've been doing around the country. This is in Chicago. In Chicago, in the city of Chicago, they had 2 old, dirty coal-fired power plants within the city limits. A lot of coal plants are kind of tucked away. You don't see them. I think it's on purpose, right? These were older, the ones that were in Chicago. So we did a lot. We had some hearings, you'll see. We were urging the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, to shut down these coal plants. This is a long thing right outside his office. It says Mayor Emanuel moves Chicago off coal. And then we had some ad campaigns here with this guy, I can't remember his name, but all over the city of Chicago, Sierra Club ads touting the fact that coal was a danger to our kids. I'll show you one other one there at the bottom. You can't see it maybe from where you're sitting, but it says your local coal burning power plant has a new filter and her name is Jasmine. Right? It's got a lot of regulators' attention on this kind of stuff. And I'll tell you that in Chicago, Mayor Emanuel was not a fan when we first started. He was not somebody who was on our side to shut down these plants. But after a several-month campaign, we really hit him hard. He came out in favor of shutting these plants, and they're shutting now in Chicago. It makes a big difference. Okay. So this is a list of some of the numbers that happened last year. We shut down a lot of coal plants. We helped them convince folks to retire some existing coal plants. We have a campus campaign, it's highlighted here. You know, there's 60 college campuses around the country that have coal plants on the campus. Who knew that, right? So you send your kid to college, and if you go, say, to Virginia Tech University, where I did a fair amount of work, there's a coal plant that is right next to the ROTC dorm. So you open your windows, all this coal ash is coming in, and coal dust from the coal pile. You're just having to wipe it down in your windowsill every day. So far, this is a little bit outdated, 20 now, 20 of those coal plants have been scheduled for retirement. Nobody ever thought about it before. It wasn't something people talked about on the campus a lot. We talked about it and helped to get them off of that. Let me see what I've got here. So what's in the future? As I mentioned, we're still trying to shut down a significant part of the existing coal fleet. And the overall big strategy, you guys who remember the tobacco wars, we want to make coal the new tobacco. We want to brand it as the new tobacco because it's harmful. It's deadly. It's something that we can do without in this country. And so you'll see, if you start really paying attention to what's happening around the country on energy stuff, you'll see what's happening to the coal industry. And I'll tell you that it's starting to work. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that a decade ago, 51% or so of our nation's electricity has come from coal. As of this fall, it's now under 35%. Okay? It was predicted in a couple of years to be under 30%. What does that mean for us? It means great things for us in terms of public health. It means great things in terms of environmental health. It also means that the coal industry's power, their political power, is going to start to wane. It used to be that powerful politicians would not cross coal. That's starting to change. You see a quote from Mayor Emanuel. You see a quote from the Washington governor there who helped us shut down 2 coal plants in Washington State. And Mayor Michael Bloomberg in New York. I'll tell you the game-changing event for us. Last year, Mayor Bloomberg announced a grant to the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign to help us fight coal around the country in the neighborhood of $50 million. The biggest gift we've ever gotten in the history of our organization. We've been around since 1892. Specifically to fight coal plants and to promote cleaner energy sources. That announcement was made in Virginia, or right around DC, in the shadow of a coal plant that we've been fighting for 10 years, right across the Potomac. 2 months after that announcement was made, that Potomac plant shut down. Okay? And I want to make sure that I stress this as much as I can. One of the things that we try to do when we're shutting down coal plants that are in existence, we try to be very aware that these are jobs, right? There are people who work at these plants. It's not like shutting down one that's being built. It's one that's shutting down that's existing and that people work at and they get a paycheck and they provide for their families. And so what we try to do, and we've had some success with this, is work with the governor in that state, work with the labor unions who represent those workers if they're a union state, work in a way that we can try to provide some sort of just transition for the workers. I'll tell you, the last story I'll tell you is in Washington State, we tried to shut down a couple of coal plants up there, and the people who were against us were the governor, the labor unions on that side, and all the workers of the plant. After a few months of negotiations and really figuring out how to shut that plant down on a scheduled basis several years down the road, had a big press conference. Who was at that press conference smiling, arm in arm? The governor, the labor union folks, and all the workers at the plant, because they knew that they were going to be taken care of, and they knew that this was, and they were happy about that, and we were happy that this plant was going to get shut down. Okay, so just to sum up, this is really, I think, I've been to Sierra Club for 10 years, and I think this is the fight, of my lifetime as far as environmental stuff. Some of you folks who may have been around a little longer have done some other amazing things on the environmental front. This is the one, I think, though, that's really going to change the entire direction of the country. If we're successful in this, by 2030, there are no more coal plants in this country that are operating, and we're operating largely on renewables and doing things more efficient, in a more efficient manner. It's going to mean amazing things in terms of our jobs. It's going to mean amazing things in terms of our public health and in terms of our environmental health. And the last thing that I'll say about this is that I think we really have an opportunity here in the United States to not only make it better here in the country, but also globally. If we really get serious about renewable energy, and we really get serious about developing the kind of technology that can provide highly efficient solar power and highly efficient wind power, it's the kind of thing that we can export to the rest of the country. I mean, that's to the world, excuse me, in ways that really can create millions of jobs here in the United States. Okay? I don't think there's any reason at all why we can't do that kind of stuff. If we don't do it, somebody else in the world is going to do it, and we're going to be buying it from them. Favorite thing that I like to talk about is that for a lot of folks in China, their very first phone was a cell phone. They never had a landline, right? When we're talking to China and we're talking to India about, hey, don't build coal plants, they say, we saw how you guys did in the United States. You built this country on coal power. Why can't we do the same thing? And what I want to tell them is that you don't have to start there, right? We can skip the fossil fuel step. But it's going to take, I think, American leadership on this to really develop the kind of high-tech, good, energy-efficient type of technology that we can export to China, we can export to India, we can export to other developing countries, so they can skip that fossil fuel step and get the kind of standard of living that they're wanting to have. So I'll close by saying that if anybody is interested in being part of the campaign here in Arkansas or in the United States, we could welcome your help. We always need volunteers, and I appreciate you letting me speak to you. Happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Let me get a mic to it first, so we can record it. Hold on, Tom.
Lifelong engineer,
Hold on, Tom.
burning fossil fuels.
Tom's not listening, Tom's talking.
But
Repeat your question for Mike.
conspicuous by its absence in any of your presentation there is what I think is the only sensible replacement for all this, which is the cheapest, cleanest, safest form of power, nuclear power plants. The Sierra Club has been one of the primary reasons that there have been no nuclear power plants built in this country for the last 35 years. Recently, one of your, I don't know exactly what position he held,
Sure.
but one of your high-level national people actually came out and said, maybe we were wrong about nuclear power, and yes, it really is the way to go. It doesn't appear that the Sierra Club has changed its...
No, we haven't. We haven't changed our view on that at all. And let me tell you why. I think it's an important question, and it's usually the first question I get when I speak to groups about coal, because it's on a lot of people's mind, right? If we're talking about changing the electric sector and for the reasons of reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, people think nuclear. That doesn't have any carbon emissions, right? I take issue with one, yeah, really tiny. It's certainly not compared to millions and millions of metric tons every year, like in a coal plant.
Concrete is the only form that puts CO2 in the atmosphere.
No, but if we're talking about reducing gigantic amounts and being effective, I think this is one of the ways we have to do it. I'll take issue with one thing that you said. You said that nuclear is the cheapest.
It is if you don't have to make...
Okay, we're going to keep talking.
It is if you don't have to make 15 or 20-year-long court fights out of it. That has been the primary reason that the prices have been as high. The other part of it is modern power plants, not stuff designed back in the 60s, which is all we've got right now, but modern power plants are lots cheaper.
Well, let me answer that question in the ways with some facts. I wish we had the kind of power that you're attributing to us. You're saying that the Sierra Club is one of the main reasons why there hadn't been any nuclear plants built. I wish we were that powerful. I doubt that we are. Maybe someday we will be. I think that the reason that we haven't had any nuclear power plants built in this country, certainly for a long time, is largely to do with expense. There's two reasons. One is expense. Let me give you some facts. If I'm going to build a natural gas plant in the United States, I can do it for several $100,000. It's not that much. If I want to build a coal plant in the United States, depending on the size of it, it might be $2 to $3 billion. If I want to build a nuclear plant in this country, $12 billion. Now, I'll be happy to talk with you, but it's not because of the Sierra Club. It's because it's a pretty significant, expensive technology. And so, so if you're a ratepayer, which I assume everybody here is, the way that power plant financing works in this country is that if I want to build a power plant in the country, I'll go and get approval to do it, but I also get a guarantee. I get a guarantee that I'm going to get that money back from the ratepayers, plus a significant rate of profit, 10% usually, 10 to 12%. Okay, so what do I want to do if I'm a power producer? You know, do I want to build the cheapest plant possible, or do I want to build the most expensive plant possible? I want to build the most expensive plant because I'm going to get a higher rate of return, or I'm going to get a rate of return on a higher amount of money. That's absolutely 100% true. Okay, and so
That's silly economics.
well, do you debate? Do you dispute the fact that that people who build power plants are guaranteed a rate of return?
No.
Okay.
And that's wrong.
Okay, well that's the only reason people build them is because it's a very expensive deal, and who would build it if they weren't guaranteed to get their money back plus a rate of return? My point though is that nuclear plants cost on multiples, they cost 3 or 4 times as much as a coal plant, and so that's one reason. It's just absolutely true. You can look at the ones that are being proposed now in Georgia, $12 billion. Okay, the second thing though, and this is the part that from an environmental standpoint gives me pause about nuclear power, is the fact that we really have not figured out what to do with all the nuclear waste. Well, I'll be happy to answer your questions if you'll let me. Okay? All right. So
Let somebody else do it, but,
well, okay. I will move on to another question, but let me finish what I'm saying to him, is that all across the country, we have nuclear power plants. The nuclear waste is stored on site, right? It's there, and we don't know what to do with it. It's just sitting there. There have been some plans to move it out to Yucca Mountain, Nevada, transport it across the country through our roads and our towns. Nobody's wanting to do that now. But we don't want to build more power plants until we figure out what to do with the waste, okay? So the combination of cost, the combination of radioactive waste, and then, truthfully, the scares that people got from Chernobyl and from 3 Mile Island have caused this to happen. Not the Sierra Club saying we shouldn't do it, or waving the all-powerful stick that we have. We're against it, but so are a lot of other groups. Happy to take the next question.
Hi, I get it. The Arkansas Living magazine. It's put out by the electric cooperatives.
Sure.
And
our friends.
the last article that was in there was kind of a propaganda thing against wind power in Arkansas, and they were saying, oh, that it kills birds and it makes people give them headaches and
Sure.
it destroys the landscape. And but I travel a lot, and they're all over Europe. They're just wind power is everywhere, and I wonder how the Sierra Club looks at wind power. I mean, it does, clutter up the landscape a little bit, but I don't see that anybody really thinks that they're highly unattractive.
Yeah, I think that's an important question to discuss. Back when wind power was really starting to come online, so to speak, you had a lot of folks, mostly in the power industry, but some other well-meaning folks too, talking about what's the impact this is going to have on birds or on bats. And there's other folks talking about the aesthetics parts of it, especially the noise part of it. I'm happy to tell you that I think those problems have largely been solved, and it's been solved by some basic things that you normally do with power plants in general. It has to do with where you site them, right? And so working with the Audubon Society and other bird groups, you can site these things that are not in important bird areas or migratory flyways. And so there have actually been some federal regs that have been promulgated just in the last year talking about siting of wind power. So the Audubon Society is on board for wind power. There used to have some questions, but the biggest bird group in the world now is all about where it goes. So I think those have largely been addressed. I can't say I've solved the problem of dealing with the electric co-ops yet because they have their magazine and I don't get to guest column.
After you finish the coal project in 2030, is natural gas next?
This is an area that I think we've certainly struggled with, and I think the environmentalists in general struggled with the advent of fracking, right? It's a big problem in Arkansas. It's a big problem in other parts of the country. This may not be a surprise to you. I'll tell you, we're not always right. And I'll tell you that 5 years ago, we were working on this coal campaign, we talked about it in terms of, hey, let's start ratcheting down these coal plants. Let's use natural gas as a transition fuel to the time when technology is advanced enough to where we have better solar and better wind. Right? I think our research and the science has improved a lot since then, and so we are not proposing natural gas as the solution, a transition fuel like we used to, largely because the science has shown us how much CO2 and how much other greenhouse gases escapes during the fracking process as part of the fracking process that we didn't necessarily know before. And so one of the things that we're trying to make sure that as we shut down all these coal plants, that we're not just replacing it with natural gas. That doesn't solve the climate problem. Gas is about half or so of the CO2 of coal, but it's still a significant amount. So do we build a whole new fleet of gas plants? I don't think the math and the science adds up to get us where we need to be to stop climate change. So it's an issue that we're struggling with a little bit, but I think we've come out on that end a little bit more clearly in the last year or two.
What is the potential? Okay.
You got to have the mic. That's the rule. It's like Lord of the Flies, man.
What do you see as the potential for geothermal? I mean, there hasn't been a whole lot done about it. I think there is potential, but it costs a lot of money to get going.
Yep.
And we have potential here in Arkansas down in Hot Springs.
Yep.
How many gigawatts could geothermal make for the United States?
I don't know the answer to that question specifically. I know that it's something, when we talk about renewables, we talk about it in terms of, we talk largely of wind and solar, but we always throw geothermal in there too, and that's a very site-specific type of technology, even more so than wind and solar. You got to go where the wind is and you got to go where the sun is, right? But geothermal, I think, is going to be one of those areas where it's very site-specific, and maybe even in terms of not geothermal to power a whole city or to power a whole neighborhood, but maybe more in a distributed generation sense. We've always been talking about huge solar farms and huge wind farms. I think that a large part of the thinking these days is going towards, let's produce the power where it's used. Let's have solar panels on a house, or let's have a wind turbine powering a particular house or farm. I think geothermal is kind of in that category. It can be more hyper-local than powering gigantic amounts of people. But in fairness, I haven't done as much in geothermal as maybe I have in wind and solar, and so my knowledge is a little more thin on that. But it's something we always push for when it makes sense in a particular area.
How much does it cost to open up a wind plant and a solar plant? Two different questions.
It depends on the size, right? And it depends on how tall you can get a wind plant. And I can't give you a specific answer on this because there's so many different variables. But let's take wind, for instance. The higher up you can go, the stronger the wind, right? So if you can build a 100-foot tower, you're going to get less energy than if you're at a 300-foot tower. Also, if you are building onshore wind turbines, they're going to be less active than offshore wind turbines, right? And so there's a lot of variables. And the happy part of this is that it's changed so much in, say, the last 5 years. The technology has advanced so much more quickly that the cost has really gone down for all of these things. I'll talk about solar panels specifically. You heard a lot in the last campaign about Solyndra, right? And on some of these other solar companies that got some subsidies from the U.S. government to move ahead. One of the reasons that Solyndra and some of these other companies failed is because they were overtaken by advances in technology from China, which has heavily subsidized the solar industry. And so there's so much solar technology coming online from around the world that the costs plummeted. And so if you, all of a sudden Solyndra had a $500 million loan from the federal government, and suddenly they couldn't pay it back because the cost went from here to here. And so their profit margin evaporated, right? So,
They had a great product.
yeah, it just didn't keep up, right? And so that's the thing. And so I don't mean to dodge your question at all. The best way that I can answer it is it's getting cheaper every week, it seems like. And so some companies are making it, some companies are not. I think the key thing that we have to do as a country is make sure that we are investing the types of dollars that can allow us to be competitive with other countries. Now China is, I don't mean to say we need to do it like China does. I mean, they are really heavily subsidizing it. But if we're really going to be a worldwide leader in renewable technology, which I think we can be, we have to get serious about it. And we get that, renewable energy gets a tiny, tiny fraction of the subsidies that are given to other polluting industries. We've got to flip that if we're really going to be serious about it.
Okay, I'm pro-nuclear also, but one thing I think you should be pointing out is how much radiation the coal and other fuels release as far as nuclear radiation. Because they release supposedly like 10 to 100 times more than a nuclear power plant. I would like that pointed out by more people so that nuclear, I think sooner or later you guys are going to be pro-nuclear. More and more green people are going nuclear with newer technologies. That's all.
Okay.
I guess,
It's on.
okay. Guess I'm pro-nuclear too, but more in the future when designs can be standardized, when we're paying more the true cost of energy from other sources. Because, you know, as much as I want to see wind and solar energy, there's still going to have to be some other base source. You know, we can use wind and solar to meet some peak demands and to cut down the loads. And like you, I think coal should be the first thing to go. Gas probably the backbone in the next most immediate future. But then hopefully when there's a single design, they do better site selection with nuclear plants, and just the costs come down. You know, I think long term, I don't think we're there yet because the reason, all the stuff you said, I agree with. The cost of nuclear plants is so high right now, the investment and all it takes. But you know, I see that as a future along with solar and solar and wind, and hopefully new developments we don't even know about. Well, and the thing we haven't even talked about, conservation, more energy efficiency.
That's a big part of the solution.
That's the big thing we can do right now, really.
You're right about that. And one thing that I'll always agree with anybody on this statement is that I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. Things are changing so quickly. Even the kind of iconic windmill designs that you see, those are changing dramatically. Solar arrays are changing dramatically. They don't look anything like what they did 5 years ago, and they won't look the same way they do 5 years. So who knows what kind of technological breakthroughs we're going to have. I think they're going to be positive, but I think we're going to be real sure about that if we make that kind of investment that we need to kind of spur that kind of innovation. Otherwise, we're going to be behind, I think. Hey.
I came in late. Have you talked yet about the subsidy issue and how much it takes to flip that equation? What it's going to take to bring more support on for renewable sources?
I think if we're going to flip it, I think we're going to have to continue doing what we're talking about doing, and more people are talking about doing. As you know, in the family and out there talking to folks, I talk about environmental solutions and environmental needs as my #1 lead, right? Let's do what's right because it's what's right. Sometimes that's an effective message. To other audiences, the effective message is not at all that. It is about jobs, and it's about economic growth, right? And so, if I'm talking to the Arkansas legislature, for instance, which I do on occasion, they will nod and smile and pat me on the head if I'm talking about, we really need to reduce air pollution in this state. This is the natural state, let's live for it, that kind of stuff. Where their ears prick up is, we've got thousands of jobs already in Arkansas that are because of the wind industry. And there's other companies that are looking to come here. And let me give you a quick example. Right now, there's a tax credit that's been in place for several years called the production tax credit. It has to do with wind power, right? It's been an incentive to build wind. It's like 2.2% a kilowatt hour or something like that. A subsidy that's paid to power producers. And it's been a driver for the last few years on keeping the wind industry afloat as they're growing. It's about to expire, right? And it's like a lot of environmental issues, unfortunately, has become a partisan issue, had become. Republicans against environmental issues, Democrats before. I'm speaking generally, there's always some exceptions. So the production tax credit, Congress has to vote to renew it by the end of the year or it expires. We've got a largely Republican delegation now. My national office said, we really need your help on working these guys to get them on the right side of this vote. So what do? We didn't go to Womack's office and Bozeman's office to talk about environmentalism. We went and said, Mitsubishi wants to build a plant in Fort Smith to build wind turbines. It's 400 jobs, but they're not coming because this production tax credit hasn't been renewed. So that's the language that people speak, right? They don't care about, I think care, right? They're hunters and fishermen, they care. But they don't care about that as much as they care about, am I going to vote against 400 jobs for my district? Or am I going to vote for it, right? I think we largely have to talk in economic terms, which we're becoming more fluent in doing, but it hasn't always been that way. And so to answer your question about how we're going to flip these subsidies, we got to convince the lawmakers and decision makers that it's in everybody's economic best interest to do that, and coal's on its way out, and this is the way of the future.
What sort of conservation, cost reduction stuff is Sierra Club backing to get consumption of energy down?
Oh, good. The leg that we haven't really talked about here today so much is energy efficiency, which someone mentioned a while ago. I think it was you. It's a huge part of what we do. So where that happens a lot of times is in the state legislatures, but also in what is called integrated resource plan processes. Every utility, usually around the state, around the country, every few years, has to come before the Public Service Commission and kind of present what are they going to do for the next few years, what's their energy plan, what's their mix, how are they looking at things. And a big part of that we've been pushing is energy efficiency. And getting involved in these processes. I've been involved in the one for SWEPCO here and the one for Entergy here last year. And we're pushing them to set goals. And they're modest goals. Sometimes it's 1% a year or 2% a year. In Arkansas right now, the Entergy mix is, I think, the first year it's 0.25%, the next year it's 0.5%, the next week it's 0.75%, right? And what does that mean in real terms? It means that if we can save 1 or 2% a year in energy efficiency, that's energy that doesn't have to be produced, right? You save enough power to not have to build that next coal plant or that next gas plant. And so to answer your question, it is a big part in every state that we're working in right now. We're not only fighting coal, but we're involved in these processes to try to mandate some energy efficiency measures on these utilities and create the kind of incentives to where they'll do them in an effective way. Because I don't think we're going to win unless we do that part as well as all the stuff we're talking about. Yes, sir.
You seem to be saying that it's wrong for the coal industry to be able to get special subsidies and special regulations that are.
You gotta turn it down.
That it's okay for that it's wrong for the coal industry to be getting special rules for themselves, and yet this is exactly what you're asking for solar and wind power, that they get in an uncompetitive source of power like wind power or solar power, because they're not competitive on an open market. They're only competitive if they get subsidies. You're saying that's okay, and yet by your own figures that you had up there was a massive increase in solar power, 1.8 gigawatts. that's less than one nuclear power plant.
It's increased dramatically over the last 5 or 10 years, right? And it's just increasing now. Let me tell you that right now, South Dakota and Iowa both produce 30% of their state's power from wind. That's a gigantic amount. Those states are net energy exporters, which is a great place to be. Now, to your first point, do I think it's fair? I think you kind of mischaracterized what I'm saying. Let me tell you why. I'm all about a level playing field. I think government subsidies play a role, right? What government subsidies have been doing for decades is subsidizing polluting industries that harm us, right? And they're giving a tiny, tiny bit to this energy that could produce, or to these industries that could produce clean energy that do not harm us. What I'm after is a level playing field. The polluting industries get massive subsidies. I didn't say take their subsidies away. I said if they're going to subsidize dirty energy that harms us, let's subsidize energy that's clean that helps us. That's what I'm saying.
You're not asking for a level playing field. You're asking for special favors for your favorite industries.
Well, I will actually be the judge of what I'm asking for. I think I know better than me. So
You are asking for subsidies for
I admitted that, and I said I'm asking for a level playing field. You're telling me that I'm not, but I am.
Well,